Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another Swedenborgian online community Thursday interview and chat. And today we are very excited to have Reverend Dr. David Fekete with us today, pastor, musician, author. Welcome, Reverend Doctor.
Hi, Cory. It's my pleasure to be here with everybody.
Well, we are quite excited to have you on, and I'm very curious, not just about your pastoral leadership and all these ways within the Swedenborgian Church, but especially you're a musician, and we play your music quite often. So I want to ask you about your process, if you don't mind, in a second.
Okay.
Great. I just wanted, before I got to that, sorry, Reverend, I wanted to check in with folks in the chat and say hello. Happy to see you all there. I'm still getting connected here, so I didn't want to get too far underway and get distracted by your reflection, David. And it looks like everything's working, so wonderful. Good to see you all there. So I'm curious, in your pastoral leadership in Edmonton, Alberta, in Canada, do you find time for music? How do you express yourself creatively within that community? I'm curious.
In terms of my ministry, I don't involve my own music very much. We've had several concert series at our church, and in that capacity, I use my musical connections to bring in musicians. And then there's dealing with the church organist and talking about music with him. But my own personal music creations don't find their way into my ministry very much.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm also a big fan of your messages. I thank you for sending a message out almost every week, it seems. Is that where you find a lot of your personal expression within that community?
Yes, those are talks that I give to the church, and then I make them available not only through my email batch mailing, but I also post them on the Western Canada Conference webpage and sometimes on our church webpage. And sometimes they find their way onto Our Daily Bread, but that's a joint venture between Tom Mueller and I.
Yes, that's a wonderful ministry within the denomination where you all share different messages from different people for all to read, which is really helpful from speaking from my ministerial position. How's that going? How are your ministries treating you, and do you feel, how did you find yourself within the ministerial call? Do you feel fulfilled with two ministries? It seems like it's more than enough.
As far back as I can remember, I felt called to ministry. Even in high school, I would be hiding in the back row in my government class reading Swedenborg's books in high school, hiding from the teacher reading Swedenborg. And then I went to our Swedenborgian University, Urbana University. It was Urbana College then. It's no longer our church's college, but it's still affiliated with us. I went to the Divinity school, but then I took a break from the church when I was about 29. I had a falling out with the church leadership and shook the dust off my feet and left for about 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Well, not 30, 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
then I came back, and in about 2004, I decided I can't get away from ministry. It was nagging at me ever since I left the church in '86. I just was restless in every job I did. It just didn't feel right. So I contacted Jim Lawrence back in 2004, and asked him about finishing up my ordination path that I'd left off in '86. And here I am in Edmonton now, 12 years, and it's like I've come home. Not that Edmonton is like coming home, but being in the ministry is as if I've spiritually come home. Yeah, the call was always there.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's beautiful. I can't believe you were you were hiding your Swedenborgian reading in high school. That's amazing. Us Swedenborgians are a special type of nerd or geek or whatever term you like. I'm definitely a Swedenborgian geek. So you felt this call to ministry throughout much of your life, and what was it about ministry? What is ministry to you?
It's several things. First off, ministry is working with people in our collective spiritual growth together. And as a minister, I see myself as a leader. And then for me personally, I've always had a personal interest in religion. First in Swedenborgian religion, and then later on in life in world religions through all the interfaith work I've done. And I bring all that interfaith work to my ministry here at the church.
Well, that's wonderful. And I think that that's a real blessing of your ministry and a lot of the ministries within the Swedenborgian Church is that you're open to other faiths, and it sounds like you have a lot of experience there. What's that experience like? Is it through your studies, through connecting with folk within other religions? What about it speaks to you?
Yes. If you had met me when I was in my early 20s, I was pretty much a fundamentalist Swedenborgian. I mean, Swedenborg was it. And anybody that didn't believe the way Swedenborgians believed or saw things the way Swedenborgians see things, they missed it. They were out of it. And I was, I guess you would say, parochial. I was very narrow-minded in my Swedenborgianism. And then when I went to our divinity school, the Swedenborg School of Religion, as it was called then, wasn't on a campus like House of Swedenborgian Studies is now, or the Center for Swedenborgian Studies, which is located on the GTU, I think, isn't it? Well, we had our own divinity school isolated from everybody else, but even there, learning about the history of Christianity expanded my outlook on religion. And then when I went to Harvard Divinity School and studied Buddhism and met people of other faiths, and when I did my CPE training with members of other religions, it began to crack the plaster cast of Swedenborg I'd put around my mind. And I enthusiastically started getting interested in other religions. I taught an Eastern religions class at Virginia, and then I joined the Edmonton Interfaith Center here in Edmonton. I became its president for a term, and I've been to 2 Parliament of World Religions. I've been to 3 what we call the North American Interfaith Network. One was in Mexico, in Guadalajara. Another was in San Diego, and we just hosted it up here in Edmonton this summer. So yeah, and every time I meet someone of another religion, I say to myself, "Wow, that's really interesting. I could go there." But I'm Swedenborgian, and having a taste and a smattering of other religions isn't strong enough to shake my foundation in Christianity and Swedenborg.
Well, that's amazing. Did you happen to go to the last Parliament of World Religions?
Yes, it was in Toronto. I wrote about it in the Messenger. I don't know if you all have it yet, but it's in the January Messenger.
Yeah, and you share quite a bit about your experience there, and I think people feel really uplifted when ministers within any type of religious organization are willing to connect with other faiths and uplift people of different cultures and beliefs and and really kind of opened the door, recognizing that we can connect to divinity in a multitude of ways. That's amazing. Now, what?
I think people get turned off when ministers are so exclusive that they damn everyone else that isn't in their church, and that happens.
That's unfortunate. What's the feeling like at the Parliament of World's Religion? Does it feel pretty open and supportive from all the people there?
Oh yeah, it's a real high. There are people like in the way they had the conference room set up is that there were different floors. There were like 5 floors, and there were vestibules in each floor. You'd have people joining in the song all of a sudden in between seminars. Just a group of people would get together and start singing, and you would go to a Native American seminar where they talked about Grandfather Moon and Grandmother Earth and the great primordial bird before creation. Then you'd go to a Hindu seminar and meditate for an hour and a half about universal consciousness. And then you'd go to a Zoroastrian choir and you'd meet this right reverend from the bishop of California, and it's just 7 days of that kind of thing.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it was really a high. It stayed with me for a few weeks, but then of course I sunk back into the world. But that's still with me. That week is still with me in my inner memory.
That's wonderful. I think you're inspiring other people to maybe take part in future parliaments. And I kind of buried the lead because I knew once we got into interfaith talk, it would be hard to move into music, which is how a lot of people hear your name in this community. But I also know that you've served as a kind of substitute online community minister every once in a while here, and as you know, we're so much about interfaith dialogue and trying to uplift people wherever they're at in affirmation and love. Do you find that within the Swedenborgian tradition you have a little bit more ability to express that part of you and to connect with other people?
Yes. You mean as a Swedenborgian, do I find it easy to interact with people wherever they are in their development and whatever faith they're in?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Yes, our church allows for that. Swedenborg has said it in many places. He says the church is everywhere where people practice their beliefs and try to live a good life. So being a Swedenborgian makes it, it's part of our belief system, I think, to reach out to people wherever they are. And people are coming to me once I don't know if you're finding this, Cory, you're newly ordained, but once people find out you're a minister, you'll sometimes find people opening up to you in all manner of ways to share their story or to ask for counsel or support. And if you're out at Blues on White, which is a blues club here, it sort of scares people when you tell them you're a minister. But in other areas of my life, it works so that it expands my ministry. Well,
I bet. And yeah, I can see how telling people you're a minister may scare or shock some, but it sounds like once someone talks with you or gets to know you, maybe it'll help kind of shake that, the more rigid name that a lot of our religiosity or dogma has added to the term minister.
Yeah, and that's there. That's there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I find it really fascinating you sharing how you were into Swedenborg from an early age, And even though Swedenborg, and I find this is true for myself and for other Swedenborgians, I'm guessing as well, even though Swedenborg talks a lot about how heaven is full of diverse people from different religions and backgrounds, even aliens, right? It's often, yeah, even aliens. It's often hard to, even though that's within the tradition, it's often hard to really embody that idea. And I find your journey to be a perfect example of not only taking the idea but using that to connect with people of all faiths and kind of uplift that global community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do you find your congregation receives that message? The people within your church, how do they react to your focus on interfaith dialogue and community?
Actually, Cory, I get a mixed response. Almost everyone doesn't like it when I go away to things like the Parliament of World Religions or the North American Interfaith Network. They don't like it when I'm away from the church, from parish. Even though I consider these seminars part of my education, part of my professional, professional growth, and I bring back to the church insights that I gather at these things. I just talked about, what did I talk about? Just a couple Sundays ago, I talked about something that I'd experienced at the Parliament of World Religions. And I have given a question period after my sermon on my services, in my church services. And one of the parishioners spoke up and said, I really like it when you go away and bring back these insights from things like the Parliament of World Religions. So there are people that do appreciate what I'm doing with my interfaith work. And then there are people that they see whenever I do something interfaith, they see it as in conflict with my parish ministry and something that's outside my parish ministry. So it's mixed. It's mixed in terms of how my church views my interfaith work. I think by far, though, the leading voices now on my church committee, my church board, are in favor of it.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think we're called to support all of our ministries, whether we take that title or not of pastor, in interfaith settings, because how else can you grow and come back with those insights? Because it's diversity, not just having the smartest people in the room, but a diverse set of people in the room that helps us gain insight and tackle big issues. Funny enough, the biggest issue around the world tends to be religions not coming together. So there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Is there a sense of hope in like the Parliament that maybe we're starting to transcend some of these bounds? Because the first Parliament of World Religions was, over 100 years ago, co-created by a Swedenborgian, if I'm not mistaken. And then it only really restarted within the last 20 years or so. Is there a hope that it's leading to maybe more interfaith dialogue that can kind of transcend some of the violence around the world?
Yes, I would say that there's a definite yes to what you just said. When I was in Toronto, there had just been that shooting at the synagogue in I forget where it was in the States. You remember? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at the Parliament of World Religions in Toronto, Muslims were forming a chain, holding hands around 7 synagogues that Saturday to protect the people. And that was announced on the floor at the general gathering of the day.
tragic.
And I think things
Well,
like that are happening more and more.
yeah, it's interesting how tragedy can lead way to what we should have been doing all along, which is forming beautiful bonds like that. And it's such a message of support from those
And you know the
Muslims.
conflict between Palestinians and Jews in Israel. So having Muslims do this for a Jewish synagogue is really a powerful statement.
Yeah, it really is. And I don't know what it's like in Canada. I've only been here for a few weeks, but I know in the States, most of the time, the news kind of focuses on, of course, right, the bad actors within any setting, and we don't get a lot of positive stories, even to kind of counterbalance the subtext of, Muslim terrorists or black criminal, and yet we know that Islam is one of the most proliferate, biggest religions within the world, and 99.99+% of Muslims would not enter violence, just like most Christians and Jews, etc. And yet we hear kind of the opposite story, and it's wonderful you uplifting that message and that's experience.
In the Quran, practically every chapter begins with Allah the Merciful, Allah the Beneficent.
Mm-hmm.
And we think of Islam in terms of warriors and terrorists too often due to the media. But in the Quran itself, Allah the Merciful is how so many of the chapters begin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's how each prayer starts. I know that most of the prayer is different almost every time, but I think the very beginning always starts with that moniker for God. Yeah, and that one wonderful thing in the Quran is the focus on being good. That's really reiterated. And of course that's true within the Hebrew Bible, Christian Bible, Hindu, Vedic scriptures, etc. But often I think we can lose sight of that, not just about, maybe religions that some try to criminalize, but also our own. Sometimes we kind of take it for granted that we're called to connect and be good.
Yeah, it's amazing how that message can be forgotten.
Yeah, and speaking of message, do you have a theme currently within your message within community, and how do you choose what to uplift week to week? I'm curious as a minister.
Well, I use the Revised Common Lectionary.
Oh, great! Yeah.
And that inspires my thinking for the message of the week. I reflect on the Swedenborg I've read, the Bible I know, the world religions I know, but I let the readings that the lectionary posts for the week focus my thought.
Yeah, that's really helpful, isn't it? The lectionary. Yeah, I just recently used the lectionary myself last week, and it is helpful. You're really, the doors are still wide open, but it kind of paints a picture. It connects you within certain themes in Scripture, because there's often at least 3 or 4 readings within one lectionary, right?
Yes, and sometimes I wonder, why did they pair these 2 readings together? And I'm wondering what did they have in mind here? But usually there's a reason why the Old Testament and New Testament readings are picked.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like marriage seems to be the theme for this week.
Oh, and are you writing on marriage this week? Is that your sermon topic?
Yes, the Isaiah reading talks about the people of Israel will be called my betrothed or something, and God will be called the bridegroom. And then there's the turning water into wine at a wedding feast is the reading from John. So looks to me like they had marriage in mind. And of course, for us, it's cosmic, the marriage of God and the church, the internal marriage within each person of love and wisdom. And there's just a lot of ways to go.
Yeah, that's right. And it is cosmic for most Swedenborgians, and I love that we can talk about marriage between us and divinity in a real unifying sense, and also allow that meaning to transcend Swedenborgianism or even Christianity and also other people, because we would believe, of course, no matter your religion, you can have this marriage with divinity, and you may call it something else, but yeah, I think that's wonderful. Well, I want to take just a moment and connect with those in our chatzy. I noticed there's a number of people here. Greetings, Paige and Albert, Ward, Alyssa, and Robert, if you're still there, and whoever else is in our chatzy. We love connecting with you all live. Of course, you can always call in at 646-564-9571. Let us know if you have any questions for Reverend Dr. Fekete. And I want to see what you all are saying. Robert says shalom. Shalom. Gry cycle. Yeah, I think he might be new to our communities. I believe that's right. Robert, let us know if I'm off base there. Hi, hello. So it says, or Albert saying, both these ministers are Americans living in Canada. Well, that's another topic I wanted to cover with you. Yeah, we're the two American Swedenborgian ministers living in Canada within our denomination. What's that been like for you, Reverend?
Well, now I have to be politic and choose my words carefully. Let me simply say this. When I first got to Canada, somebody ran up to me and said, there was a Canadian explorer that his wife went twice as far as Lewis and Clark did. And his own wife did twice what Lewis and Clark did. And I'm thinking, okay.
She's the explorer. That's funny.
I'm thinking, welcome to Canada. Thank you for that fact. And there was considerable prejudice against the U.S. Up here in Canada. And a lot of the people I met here, when I spoke, they heard my American accent, and I could feel a wall going up. Being a white male in the U.S., I had always been in a position of privilege. But coming to Canada, it was surprising for me to be in a minority role, and a despised minority, or maybe despised is too strong a word, but a disliked minority. So that was a real wake up, a really educational experience for me. Now, though, the Canadians don't hear my American accent, but Americans hear a Canadian accent coming out of me. But I'll tell you, though, now that I've settled in Canada, the people here are beautiful and polite, and it's just a great place to be.
How long ago was that when you first moved to Canada?
Yeah, that was in 2006.
Okay. Wow. Well, I hadn't heard. Yeah, I hadn't heard that before. That's really interesting to me. So what was it like? Did you feel that was an environment that maybe helped you to be aware of your privilege or humble you? What was the impact there?
Well, I had to live here, right? So
Yeah.
it was really uncomfortable. Having
that's
that wall go up. Nope. See, Canadians are ultra polite, and where I live, and they would never they would never say it to my face, and they would never confront me about it. But you would feel the animosity with that wall going up, that dislike. So it was uncomfortable for me, and it taught me a lot. I gave a lecture at Urbana University after being in Canada for maybe 4 years. And I told them about my experiences with what I guess you would call it a form of racism, although it's based on nationality, not race. And the African American students in the class I taught there about my experiences in Canada really resonated with what I was saying. And I found myself asking them, what do you do when you're in a situation like this? What do you do?
That's great. Well, that's great that it kind of inspired that connection, and you had the awareness to want to ask. It's nice. It's nice that, in a way, if when we become more aware of our privilege, and it's a very unsettling experience in my past to be put in situations where I feel kind of whether it's weakened or disconnected or a stranger, but it's also strangely a growth opportunity. It's a liminal space to sometimes be rejected. Not that it's good.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and I think it's important for all of us to remember that people go through that every day, and no matter how long, African Americans or Black Canadians or Indigenous people, First Nations folk are in certain settings, they're going to continue to feel that way, and they can't.
Mm-hmm.
They can't. Their skin doesn't get paler as they live in a certain way. Unfortunately, that they have to experience that. Wow. Well, so you've gotten more used to Canada. Canada has adjusted some of your habits
to me
and welcomed you. Yeah, adjusted to you, and I do find, I agree with you, that people here are very welcoming and loving, and wonderful attitudes. And I love the way the governments run in general. I mean, they're not shut down, so that's a benefit.
Yeah.
but also just like everything, sometimes it feels like it's a little bit more is required of you as in being in Canada, but it always makes sense, and I find that that's good. So in your community, do you find you attract Canadians who have been Swedenborgian or are new to the faith? What kind of people are within your pastorship there?
I had a pretty solid core group that identified with the church more than they did with Swedenborg, okay? Mm-hmm. And then in growing the church, people that I meet personally outside the church through the different groups I go to, really that are, I guess I would say, that find me to be a remarkable minister, in that I'm not doctrinaire, closed-minded, and I do things like go to Blues on White on weekends or something. And they say, well, maybe this is something I'd like to check out. And so those are the people, the new people that. But on the other hand, younger people, I think, today are not really church-goers. I don't know what they want or what they, you would have a feel for them, but the church tend to be older, I think, in my case. And our church is pretty traditional, hymns and a sermon and a Bible reading.
Mm. And what about your other ministry, Our Daily Bread? How does that treat you? Do you feel like it's a good service for the denomination? I know many of us do.
Yes, Our Daily Bread is still finding its way. We've been only around for 3 years, I think, online. And we've had numerous calls with the president of the Council of Ministers, Cory, and we're still hashing out what our daily bread could be while we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, well, I thank you for your ministries, all of it, you in general, just hoping and being willing to connect across boundaries and uplift your experience. I think it's a blessing for the denomination that you're willing to share in the messenger your experiences there, and I think it's a good invitation and reminder for the rest of us that there are these wonderful gatherings with thousands of people that really embody what most of us are about. So why not come? And I want to, before I move back to the chat, I noticed there's a number of questions there. I'm curious. Do you still make music? Are you still creative in that outlet?
I'm glad you asked that question.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm making a CD of some of the music you already have here, but not as professionally made as what I'm doing with it now. The CD will be coming out most likely in about a month.
Oh, wow.
I've got 11 songs on it. Some of them you already have, but not, as I said, not done as well as the CD's going to be. And you might want to look into that when I get the CD done. I'll be sure to let you know. And
well, thank you.
if you get a CD, I'll allow you to use it on the chat radio, the blog chat radio community.
Well, that's grand news. Well, we'll be sure to uplift it. What's that?
It's been a real heart-wrenching and process over about 3 years making this CD.
Wow. Yeah, really, you said heart-wrenching and intense?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes you'll go to record. I'm recording it all on my own computer. I'm not using a recording studio. And I don't know how much you use technology, but sometimes the computer has a mind of its own.
Yeah.
And you're doing everything right that you think you should be doing, and yet sound isn't coming in from the vocalist. And there's a vocalist you're paying $150 to sing, and the computer, things like that are heart-wrenching, yes.
Oh, man.
But you're done.
It's all done.
Almost.
All the recording's done. I just have to mix, master, and produce the disc now.
Well, congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, here. I know many of us, including me, are very excited about that news that you have a new album coming out. Please send me the link to purchase, and I will include that link in an email to the online community.
Sure. It'll be on iTunes.
Oh, well, perfect. Yeah, please.
As well as a hard copy.
Oh, yeah? Through Amazon? Or where?
I'll have to, I don't know. The company that produces the disc will take care of all of that for me, I believe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, fantastic. Is there a name for the album?
Moods, Mellow, and Blue.
Moods, Mellow, and Blue.
Yeah.
Well, you heard it here, everyone. Moods, Mellow, and Blue, soon to play over your speakers or headphones. That's great, Reverend. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, your music really inspires people within this community, and I find it, especially the songs we have, many of them are very meditative, melodic, touching songs. And will those songs be on there, or are these new in general?
Yes, I think the songs you have will be there. I don't even remember which ones you have. I know you have Rain Falling and Gratitude.
Oh, those are fantastic.
Those will be on the disc. No, gratitude won't, but rain falling will, and some other ones that you might not have.
Hmm. Oh, fantastic.
You can use both versions of rain falling. I don't. You might like the old version better. I don't know.
Well, I don't think most people have any of your music, so it'll be nice to be able to pick it up. And is it a spiritual practice for you, this creation process? It sounds like once you were in the studio, it might have, taken on a life of its own.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the songs I wrote were love songs too, which, depending on the mystical marriage, whether that's theological or not, I'll leave that up to the listener. You know what I'm finding? People that listen to my music, like jazz musicians, they say it's unique, and I don't see it as, I think I'm writing jazz, but they hear it being very peaceful, its tone quality.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about that lately. You know what I think it is? I get into a certain mood when I read Swedenborg. My mind gets like peaceful, and I get this feeling of peace come over me. Or when I read the Bible, when I write a song, I try to capture an emotion, and I think a lot of my songs capture that peace that comes over me when I read Swedenborg.
Wow.
Even though I'm not thinking about Swedenborg, even though I'm not writing about a doctrinal idea, that feeling of peacefulness comes through the music, I think.
Well, that's amazing. And I can resonate with what they're saying, and it's really interesting to hear that's where it's coming from, that peaceful connection. Wow. Well, that definitely clearly is a spiritual practice for you, and a spiritual expression that, honestly, I think listening to your music is spiritual practice. So, thank
Thank
you.
you.
No, it's really, really great. Excited for that news. Okay, so before we have a few minutes left, so we're not running out of time, but I do want to reconnect with the people in the chat. See, there's a number of comments here. So you've been here since 2006. So that's what, 13 years.
Going on 13 years, yeah.
13 years, yeah. Someone asked about how long. Interesting range of responses of your members to your interfaith work, David Page says. She also says, I'm very proud of our convention denomination and being active in the World Parliament of Religions and in the National Council of Christian Churches. Yes, so very proud.
I haven't
I'm
said anything
curious
about the National Council of Churches, but I'm on the Faith and Order Commission there. And Rich Toffel is on the Interfaith Dialogue, I believe, commission there.
Well, tell us about
so I
that
go to all the
organization.
meetings for for the National Council of Churches.
Oh, you do? Oh, wow. What is that group, and what do you do there?
I think there are 30 Christian churches, believe it or not, 30 Christian members of the National Council of Churches. And we meet twice a year for 30 Christian. These are all Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And we meet twice a year to talk about and confront issues that are in America today. Like we just got done talking about mass incarceration, jails, and we wrote a book about it in my Faith and Order Commission. I have an article in that book. It's called Thinking Theologically About Mass Incarceration and the inequities in terms of race that tend to populate our jails. So we just got done dealing with that. Now we're talking about climate, and we're putting together another book about climate change. So we deal with pressing issues of the day from a Christian perspective.
That's needed, and that's fantastic. And especially, we reflect on both of those topics within this community. I think we'd be really curious to read what you all put together. Not to put another thing on your to-do list, but we'll be looking for we'll be looking for that publication, those publications.
Yeah, well, the one on mass incarceration is already out. You can get it on
Is it?
Amazon.
Well, let me search for it now. Mass incarceration.
Yeah, I think
National-
it's called Thinking Theologically About Mass Incarceration.
Oh, cool.
Did you find it?
I did. Paulus Press.
Yep, that's it.
Like,
That's
I
it?
get the wrap up. My article's the last one in the book.
Oh, nice.
I bring it home. Pastor Dave
Well-
brings it home.
Yes, you do. That's fantastic. I feel like often it's an unreflected upon and vastly underrepresented tragedy, criminal tragedy. Furthered by our government, furthered by our society, furthered by us, especially here in the West and in the United States, especially, particularly, the mass incarceration.
Yeah. The stats are just staggering.
Yeah, it really is. The systems and the process that got our mass incarceration started, and that furthered criminality and still does within the states, especially, is essentially just continued slavery in a lot of ways, especially with low wage work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What's your article on, Reverend?
It basically presents the startling facts of mass incarceration in that African Americans and Latinos are disproportionately represented in our prisons, and I compare it to Amos. Is this a holy nation that does this injustice to the minorities? So all through my article, I'm comparing the inequities in our prison system with Amos's critiques of his society.
Wow, that's really powerful.
It's not a long article. I think it's only 10 pages. And it's approachable. I didn't write it with an academic voice.
Oh, I thought you had something else to say about that. I feel like that is such a ministry, that publication and your article sounds like it's really hitting home, whether or not we think it does. It really, it's such a untouched upon topic, and yeah, our religious groups, our nonprofits, everyone, we should be doing more about that issue and uplifting it as a monstrosity as it is.
It is, yes. That's a good word.
Well, as it sounds like you're pointing out in your article, if the core of our society hinges in a way or hides such a black hole of destruction, suffering, torture, pain. I don't know. We could continue with the words. I think you're right. Can we be holy as a nation? Can we be healthy as a nation? No matter our traditions or our backgrounds or beliefs, I would say no. I would agree with you there. What do the other articles touch on? Are there some other topics that you'd like to uplift from that publication?
Well, they're all about mass incarceration. They're all about American prisons. And some of them are from African American voices about racism and white privilege. Some of them are historical, like one of them is about the history of Methodists and missionary work in prisons, and it's a collection of essays. It's really got a lot of variety in it, but all about mass incarceration.
Wow. Well, I'll keep thanking you, I think, for your ministries, because that is fantastic. I'll be purchasing that straight away, as I'm sure many of our listeners will, because wow, that's really important to try to change. Yeah. Thank you. And Robert shares that Allah is the most kind, generous, loving, and forgiving, I believe. Oh, yeah, I think Allah is. I think God is the most kind, generous, loving, and forgiving divine being. In fact, would you agree, Reverend, that we receive those qualities from God, from Allah?
Well, we sure don't get it from watching TV.
Well, I don't know. I learned a lot from my TV shows. Just kidding.
Yeah. Yes, I think we get those qualities from God, and I also would say without religion, I don't think those are qualities our society really champions. In my opinion, society teaches us to get more, to get better, to beat the next guy, to be number one. And where, except in a church, are you going to get a message, be in harmony with your brothers and sisters, be compassionate, be loving, be modest, be humble? Where else but spirituality do you get those messages?
Well, you have me there. You do. Yeah, and I think religiosity can often transcend that term for a lot of people. I think, especially in a world with New Age traditions, some of which were actually inspired by people inspired by Swedenborg, like Emerson and what have you. But in a way, some people use different terms for that connection, whether it's with the universe or with community or we're all one. But I think you're right. A lot of it, it goes back to the deep tradition of spirituality and religion and its multifaceted, appearances, right? Yeah. Would you? Well, actually, let me go back to the chat. See, we still have a few minutes here. The nature of news. This is from Albert. The nature of news in the news business makes a focus on tragedy. If a dog bites a man, it is not news. If a man bites a dog, it is. That's well put, Albert. Thank you. Yeah, is there a way to kind of change that cycle in your mind, Reverend? Is it hopeless to hope that news could maybe shift gears? And I know local news often has its kind of, this is the good that's happening story, but it's like that minute before the last commercial break, or
Yeah, that minute. Yeah.
Is it hopeless?
Yeah.
I knew a journalist when I was living in Florida, and he said a news story should alarm and stimulate.
Wow.
So they're trying deliberately to do that, or no one will watch or read. So when you get alarmed at a news story, remember the journalist is trying to make you alarmed.
Indeed. I'm clearly on board that negative news all the time paints this really negative picture, especially when it is villainizing certain people often, because our marginalized are often put in really tough situations, so they act out or there's actually many reasons, of course, behind that. But in a way, that news also helps uplift how we can change. But as you're saying, most of the time it's just, here's the bad news. Does it?
Yeah.
Is this striking enough? It reminds me of this movie. I think it's called Nightcrawler. Well, speaking of whether or not we get positive messages, do you know it? Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear he's from a Swedenborgian family. Anyway, in that movie, he starts creating the crimes, right, that he can broadcast. Wow.
Yeah.
I hope it's not just a negative spiral into destruction due to our navel gazing, but. And Robert also shares, hi, I'm new since a couple months. Yes. He also says you never lock your doors in Canada, eh? Do you lock your doors?
I lock the door to my building and I lock the door to my condo.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's because of news or podcasts like My Favorite Murder, but I'm definitely not going to leave my doors unlocked.
But I only lock my doors because I'm afraid a moose is going to wander in.
Oh wow! Do they know how to like turn the knob? No, that's funny. Does that happen in your area?
No, I've never even seen a moose all the 12 years I've been here.
Well, that's funny. Albert shares, as a black American, I like to teach that in America the prejudice is negative. But in Europe, and I have experienced this, it's a positive prejudice. Oh, that's interesting to hear, Albert. Often they imagine that my being in Europe some years ago and not in the military suggests that I am a particularly effective, intelligent, etc. person. This as a prejudice without any actual evidence. Well, it's interesting when prejudices work in the opposite direction. That's nice. Paige shares, look forward to the new music from you, David. Moods, mellow and blue. A very evocative title for the music. And Robert asks, does Reverend Fekete have a very short elevator pitch for what's the best about Swedenborgians? And thank you, Paige, for being as excited as I am. Sorry.
Yeah, wow.
It's the best.
What's
the best
about Swedenborg is that he allows us to ask if a given idea is reasonable or not. And he doesn't ask us to do unreasonable things like in the Fisher King movie where they had to steal a grail from a rich man's house to bring healing to Robin Williams. No, we can be reasonable in our thinking and we can be reasonable in our actions and still be religious people. That's perhaps one of the best things about Swedenborg.
Yeah, he very much, I have to agree with you, he very much reiterates in his theology, typically reflecting on the Bible, that, if you're not believing it for yourself, if you're not using your own logical, rational mind, then you're just kind of forcing your belief, and you shouldn't believe anything that isn't logical to you, and so
right.
Find your truth, right? Find your wisdom. You know, it makes this kind of sense that when you hear it, it's often like, well, what else? And I think that's his point, is that often we believe we're in religion, but because we're not willing to grapple with it with our minds and really come to understand it and dismiss the things that don't make sense, especially since most of the time our theology come from people, you know, whether you're Lutheran from Luther, or if you're Calvinist, or descendant from Baptist thinkers or what have you. Most of our theology taught from the pulpit is sourced with theologians and filtered through preachers, and then of course through your own mind. But then often we're asked within the pews to just accept what we hear, and that God and God's message is a mystery, and that doesn't sound like that's your approach, Reverend.
No. I'm against asking to believe something on faith that I haven't thought through. And then let me temper that, though, with my profound belief that we're only scratching the surface of what is, that there is a whole lot that we don't know yet that is waiting to be known. Swedenborg wrote 30 volumes of theology, and then he went and said that whatever the angels say is ineffable. We can't understand it.
Good point. Even Swedenborg's theology is from his human perspective, his finite human perspective, right? Yeah. Well, and I think that's, one of the ideas that really resonate with me within Swedenborg's writing is that there's a reason that Jesus Christ always talked in parable, and why Swedenborg himself viewed Genesis, the creation story, to Revelation, as a parabolic story, if that's the word. And because God speaks through these symbols, and these symbols we find all around us, and what's beautiful about a parable is that they can speak to a child and also to, wizened lady, from the least to the greatest of us, we can get something deep and touching from a metaphor, right?
Yeah, we're still unpacking Jesus' metaphors 2,000 years later.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think that is a beautiful message, Reverend, from beginning to end. I have to thank you for your ministries and just share that I know the people listening are as excited as I am about interfaith dialogue and hopefully learning to be more excited about it and to embody it. And so I thank you for your inspiration there, Reverend.
Well, you're more than welcome. Just call me up anytime. I'll be glad to do this again. And welcome to Canada.
Yeah, I wonder if we can, how far are we from each other? Can we meet?
Oh, we're pretty far. But by the way, Cory, while I have you on the phone, we're talking about doing a youth retreat here in Edmonton. We want to bring you over here.
Oh, fantastic. Well, the people here in Kitchener will be very excited to hear that.
Do you have teens there that you could bring over here?
There are a few. Yeah. That would be great. Let's stay connected and that would be a lot of fun.
All right.
Yeah, is that planning for this year?
Yes, I believe we are. Maybe in the spring.
Oh, sounds like
which would be in
perfect
July.
timing.
Okay.
Hey?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we have to end with some Canadian humor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just round it out by just covering the few messages we didn't get to before we say goodbye. Paige says she'd like to hear your answer too about that, so thank you for sharing your thoughts on what's great about Swedenborgianism. Yes, Jake Gyllenhaal is from a Bryn Athyn, Swedenborgian family. Almost everyone is very creative within that family. Seems like it with his sister, is it Maggie?
Yeah, Maggie.
Wonderful actress, of course. And she says, I need to leave for tonight. Thanks for a most interesting interview. Well, goodbye, Paige. Bye, Ward. Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening and connecting. And thank you for blessing us tonight, Reverend Dr. David Fekete.
All right. Good night.
Good night. And remember to subscribe, folks, and follow us on iTunes and Android. Bye. Go forth knowing that you are quite loved.